so I'll start with the introduction. Okay, we've just been told that we are live, which is fantastic. So good afternoon and welcome to this week's We Are Careers show with myself, Chris Webb, from Sheffield Hallam University, employability advisor and registered career development professional. As always, joined by Sabiha, my co-host in crime, or maybe not crime. Sabiha, very good afternoon to you.
Well, we do occasionally, thank you, Chris, we do occasionally get into trouble. So I quite like the idea that we're giving ourselves a little bit of an edge. So, hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name's Sabiha, and I specialize in working with millennials, helping them land and secure their next roles as fast as they possibly can, working on an international market. So thank you for that, Chris.
Fab, thanks, Sabiha. So we obviously a lot to talk about this week in relation to things like A-levels and GCSEs, but we are actually going to push that back to our next show so that we can do a really comprehensive results day show in 2 weeks' time. So keep an eye out for that. We are going to be talking about that, but there's almost too much to cover. And one of the topics that people were really keen to hear about, based on the poll that we did right at the start of running these shows, was about labour market information, or LMI. So we're really, really pleased today to be joined by Helen Janota, who's here with us as well. And Helen, just to kind of introduce yourself very quickly and a little bit about your work, if you don't mind.
Well, I'm an independent careers and labour market information specialist. I'm working in the career sector for 20 years now, so I've been around a while. I'm also a registered careers professional as well. And I work with a range of organisations to provide training and various resources as well on the labour market for practitioners and sometimes to young people direct as well. And I also support good practice around using careers information as well, whether that's online, searching or developing collections of resources. But at the moment, I've been doing a lot of training.
Wow, Helen, that is a lot of things that you do as a registered career practitioner. So obviously a lot of people within our community will know you for all of those wonderful things that you've mentioned just now, and also the fact that you are passionate about LMI. But is there an interesting fact about yourself, a fun fact about yourself that perhaps maybe members don't know yet that you'd like to share with us all today?
I am quite musical, and I am in a band, in a sort of a folk band, and I've been performing for years, since the age of 5 in infant school. Actually, was my first solo performance. But I play violin, play guitar, do vocals. So I do like a bit of performing, although it's been a bit quiet lately. But that's my little personal fact.
Understandable. Oh, wow. So it seems like it's not just careers that you have an area of expertise in. Also, there's a musical element. Can I ask you, Helen, have you ever brought that into your sessions or your training ever, your musical talents?
I think I have never brought it in. That's a very good question. I've never really thought about it before, but no, I've never burst into song or anything like that, I don't think.
Perhaps that could be a new innovation there, maybe. Right there for you, a new way of career coaching. Yes.
If we've got some, if anyone's sort of watching as well on the thread, I thought, Sabiha, you might have to cover this, but I can see a couple of people have posted about the fun fact. So, I mean, if you've got a particular hidden talent that you possibly also might combine with your careers practice, do share with us in the comment thread. And of course, as we go through the session, as always, and the show as always, do share your thoughts via the comment threads. I can see a couple of people doing already, so that's great.
They are. So we thank you. And as Chris said, we're always looking for feedback, comments and contribution. And again, obviously, we've got the fantastic Helen with us today as well. So if you have questions for Helen as well, please do put them in the comments. And Mark Rice just said, Helen, if you ever need a drummer, he's ready and willing.
Yeah, we've never had a drummer, so yeah.
That could be something there. And that really brings us on to Helen, and I'd love to ask you, so one thing that we always do each time when we have the show is that we talk about a feel-good story. So Helen, what's your feel-good story this week when it comes to career guidance?
Well, it's more about young people in general, really. And I want to just highlight a new book that's just been published. It came out actually a couple of weeks ago, and it features the stories of about 60 young people from around the world who are looking to reduce the impact of climate change, often, where they live, so often perhaps in their own families or in the country that they live, and sometimes because of the adverse situations that they're in. So the book's called United, We Are Unstoppable, and it's edited by Akshat Arathi. And the stories range from sort of a young man in India encouraging cafes and restaurants to reduce their use of single plastics, from the young woman in the UK who set up the UK Student Climate Network. So I just thought it was like a real sort of, it's celebrating young people, their achievements, capabilities, and also recognising that, they've got a lot to say.
That sounds like an absolute phenomenal book and resource for anybody who's sort of working with. And I know for someone like myself who works with young people, having those, feel good stories and case studies and books out there promoting the value and contribution that young people bring is amazing. So definitely it will be one that I will be sort of looking out for. So thank you for sharing that, Helen. And by the way, for all of those of you that are watching the show, remember we will be giving you a link to this resource and all the other resources that we talk about here today in our new look document after the show as well. So look out for that as well. So if you hear anything or you see anything, let us know. Also as well, if you have a feel-good story. So this week, we're doing something a little bit different. We're now evolving the feel-good story. And Chris and I had a discussion about this. And what we want to do is we want to champion good practice, because we know within our community alone, there is so much amazing wealth of experience and talent and amazing good practice that is taking place. And we want to highlight that as part of our feel-good story. So each week we're going to be giving a shout out. So what we're asking our members to do and our viewers to do is that if you yourself are innovating and you have a new program of activities, or perhaps you've created something that has created phenomenal results, we want to hear from you. So you can either nominate yourself, or you can nominate somebody else. Perhaps there's a colleague or somebody that you're working with who's done some phenomenal transformative work that you want others to hear about. So this is your moment. This is your chance to either self-nominate or to nominate somebody else. And we'll be listing more details about how you can do that over the coming days. So for today's shout out of the week and feel good story goes to Mark Rice. And I want us all, and if you can, in the comments below, I want you to all share a clap. And the shout out goes to Mark Rice for all his hard work and effort and energy that he's put into really pushing forward the private practitioners group, including the latest video that is now available for not only for in the group, but also for us to use as a promotional video to talk about what we do as career practitioners. So congratulations, Mark. We recognize you. And it's amazing, and keep up the good work. So thank you for that. Now, as Chris mentioned earlier, one of the most popular requests for topics for us to cover was LMI. Now, some people find the idea of using LMI either intimidating, overwhelming, or dare I say, not worth the time, because things are changing so fast. So what's the point? So we invited today's guest, Helen, as an expert in this area to walk us through how we can make the most of LMI and some practical tips. Now, when I was speaking to Helen before the show about this, it became very clear to me that there is no one silver bullet, but rather a good practice process, which can help you reduce your anxiety or concerns about how to use LMI. Now, already before the show went live, we had a couple of questions come in. One came in from Liz McGuire and another came in from Lisa LaRue. So Helen, I'm going to put these two questions forward first, which was from Liz: what are the best local source of LMI in the current climate? And Lisa wanted to know, so how, there are so many ways to gather LMI. What's the good practice to follow?
Okay, so I'll answer the first one, and then you might need to remind me of the second one.
Will do.
So local LMI, yes, always a tricky one, because there isn't really that one place, as you say, to go, and certainly at the moment. So I mean, one to sort of go-to place in the past, before the pandemic hit, would have been to start off with no miss. So I think you've got the web addresses in the resources, haven't you? Start off with no miss. And the reason for that is that it provides some very granular data down to district level, on the types of on the jobs in specific sectors and in that district area, and then you can do comparative analysis. So you can look at the time series data going back to see any trends that might have happened, and you can see, you know, which are where the most of the jobs are, and the breakup and the share of jobs in the area. Now, that was the BRES data, but at the moment, obviously, that's going to be quite out of date because it hasn't been produced for a couple of years. The more regional information is still available. They've changed the data set. But anyway, that's, I suppose, not necessarily the best place to go at the moment. I would say there's probably at least two places to go. So the local enterprise partnerships, as far as I'm aware, have the responsibility for local labour market information. And so that would be, you know, my first port of call would be to have a look at what your local enterprise partnership is saying. Now, I know that some areas have produced new strategies in the pandemic at the moment to say where they want that their region to move. But obviously some haven't. So it's, like I say, it's very hit and miss at the moment. I would say that for the current picture, you could use local vacancy data. Now, Adzuna is an online jobs board that has partnered up recently with the Office for National Statistics, and they are producing online vacancy data for the ONS, so that we can have a look at what's happening in the different areas. But Adzuna is quite a good place to look at what's happening right at the moment, and also the reason I like it is they produce it's like a jobs map, so you get a visual representation of where those jobs are at the moment, so you can see if there are more jobs in a specific area, say 20 miles up the road, compared to where you are at the moment. So that, in terms of what's going on at the moment, it's really that limited. What I would say is it's always a time factor, I think, with LMI, and finding the time to really find out what's going on in your area. And you could hook into some of those local alerts on a website, for example, the Business Desk or Business Advisor, and they can give you an idea of where some of the massive job losses are, but also where some of the gains are as well. So, for example, recently I had an email through, I think it was last week, to say that Amazon is setting up a new distribution centre in Nottinghamshire. It's going to create, 1,000+ jobs. That's really useful LMI to have, obviously depending on your client group and what their situation is. But it is about fact finding, and I think when you mentioned earlier,
and I think that really fits in, Helen. The sort of the resources that you've shared there about what people can do and where people can go, and I think that really fits in now with what Lisa was asking, which is, what is a good what is good practice to follow, and I feel you've sort of started to answer that in terms of what you should be doing and how you said setting aside time. So, is there sort of things that you do in your day or in your week where you like I know, like I might spend an hour in an afternoon where I'll set aside to say, this is the task that I'm going to do, and that will be LMI. So is there things like that you do that also other members can learn from as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to say is it's about synthesizing information, isn't it? You're not necessarily going to get one piece of information that answers the question for that client. So yeah, I have those alerts that come through daily. I mean, again, it can be intrusive, but they come through, and then I suppose I have a sort of in my head. It's not very sort of planned out in that sense, but of when certain pieces of information come out. So when certain data is released. I follow Twitter, actually. I follow various people on Twitter, and I find that that's really helpful. If you can set up, for example, on Twitter, a list of people who are constantly tweeting labour market information, it can be a private list. It doesn't have to be out there in the public. Then when you click on that list, it just brings up all of the recent tweets that they've sent out, and I think that's going to be a really useful way of just seeing, because that's really sort of, you know, as current as it can get, having a look at what people are saying. And in that way, if you're following the right people, you'll pick up people like Charlie Ball, who tweets about graduate data. You'll pick up people from the IES. You'll pick up when certain reports have just been released, the EDGE, or the skill shortage vacancy bulletin, skill shortage bulletin. So you'll then pick up when those come out. That's perhaps another way of doing it, rather than having something come to your inbox. You're going to that information.
Helen, just to really quickly there, if that's okay. So just a couple of things just to pick up on there, if that's all right, if we can just kind of briefly interrupt you. Is that okay? So just a couple of questions that have come through in relation to the last section of things you've been talking about there. I think one comment that's coming from Mindfulness Practice Limited, just in terms of the sources that you were mentioning, particularly I think around the alerts, are those all England specific, or are those kind of UK wide, the ones that you've been mentioning there?
Now, because I always look for my region. They definitely include Wales. I think they are UK wide. Yes, I think so. But yeah, I think they are.
I think you made a good point there, though, actually. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a really good point in there, actually, about that kind of local versus national, because I know this is something that Charlie Ball talks a lot about with the graduate labour market, which is stop referring to it as a national labour market, because really it's a series of regional labour markets. So I think that it's a really interesting point to come to when we talk about LMI. There's a couple of really good points in the comments as well. So people particularly talking about synthesizing of LMI, which is what you've kind of alluded to already. And I suppose it comes back to Lisa's question, really, which is that idea of, and I know we've spoken about it before, Helen, in terms of all these different sources, whether they've kind of be first-hand, you know, sort of the top-line data from maybe the EMSIs or the Adzunas, whether it's kind of that informal data that you're collecting from speaking to employers or colleges, etc., and bringing all of that together. To kind of come back to Lisa's question, what are your kind of thoughts in terms of that process then, and synthesizing all those things together, and what perhaps are some useful ways of doing that to perhaps avoid the mistakes people make with misinterpreting data, I suppose?
Well, I think a lot of it will depend on how comfortable you feel with it, because obviously we've got the labour market information, which may not necessarily be intelligence, and you might literally have the data, and you'd have to interpret what you will from that, which obviously takes some skill and some knowledge and a lot, sort of experience, I suppose. So, but one of the things I would suggest that I suggest to people, I wish I could sort of show it, sort of a grid, is spend some time looking at some of those recommended resources and put those into sort of a grid, a table as it were. And then in the so that's one column. In the next column, you're looking at what that resource actually does. So it might be that it provides local earnings data. It might be that it provides trends. It might be that it provides a more narrative sort of a look at a particular sector, or it might be graduate information. It might be for career changes. And so sort of break it down into what it does. And then in the next column, you're looking at who it's actually for. So, the Business Insider emails, you might say, well, they're for practitioners, because they can then work out how useful that information as it comes in, what's useful for their clients and what isn't, because it's all about relevance with LMI. If you want, obviously it's about other things as well, accuracy and currency, but relevance is really important. because
Helen, I love that what you've just done there is that you've literally just given all of us a template to follow. You're saying, here are the columns, here is what you should be looking for, and here is the information that you can start sort of populating those columns with. And that just, for those of us that feel overwhelmed by, LMI or feel sort of a little bit fearful of it almost, you've just given everybody a practical tool that they can follow. And you know what, Helen? The comment section is blowing up. We're getting so much feedback. I mean, we're getting question after question after question. I mean, you've had Oliver talking about Azuna and talking about, finding apprenticeships, how that can be illustrated using local distribution of apprenticeship vacancies if you use the browse search function. We've got Lisa, whose question that you've just answered, talking about how she feels that, RCDPs, we are LMI synthesizers. You've got Liz asking, what do you think about NOMIS? And you've got Rebecca Clay-Jones jumping in on the conversation and saying, I think perhaps even the nature of regional labour markets, it's changing due to increased flexibility and home learning. Is anyone aware of data sources that capture flexibility?
Just a few of those things. One thing about the regional labour markets is really that, and this is something I talk about when I sort of do presentations and things, is it's only useful to a certain degree because what's the situation in the south of a region might be extremely different to the north. It might be very rural in the north and very urban in the south of big conglomerations, or west to east. So going back then to Liz's point about NOMIS is that information, then the granular information that we have, is actually not current at the moment. So there's just no answer to say you need to go here, and also it's so patchy with the LEP information. One thing I would like to say actually is that what I think lots of people are talking about, how important the local labour market information is. So there's two things I'd like to say about that. One is that make sure you know your key sectors in your area. You can find those out via either your LEP. If that information is not apparent, do a search. So I think I put this in the notes. So do a search for key plus sector plus either your city, it might be your region, it might be your LEP, and see what it comes up with. And sometimes there are organizations that are sort of business investment organizations that provide those key sectors. So they are the sectors where that local, the local authority and the local LEP wants to protect those jobs, wants to grow those jobs. So they're really important. Secondly, I'd just like to say that actually taking a step backwards and looking at the broader labour market is just as helpful for looking at local labour markets, in that you get an idea of what's actually happening and the main broad trends, what's driving change. And if you can think about those really big drivers for change, you'll start to realise which jobs are more vulnerable. For example, with the visitor economy, that's a difficult one because jobs were growing in most areas, and jobs are in demand for tourism, hospitality, and obviously they've sort of fallen off a cliff more or less at the moment, although starting to come back now, and the same with the arts. But things are, the general trends.
So Helen, So Helen, such a great point there. And in a way, you segmented so beautifully into sort of one of the other areas that we wanted to explore with you. So we've talked now about sort of local versus national and sort of a process that you can follow. And, you sort of started to talk about sector perspective, but also as well as sort of finding labour market information for different, sort of sectors. Is there a way of using labour market information and intelligence with different ages and ranges of where people are in their journey of their career as well? Would love to hear your thoughts on that, Helen.
Obviously it always depends on your client group as to what you're using, but I think it's maybe more about also the presentation of that information is important, because you might have some websites that are clearly aimed at young people, but you might actually be able to use them with adults as well, depending on what the graphics are like. But I think it's maybe more about sort of learning styles as well. So obviously some of the information itself is going to be relevant to specific clients, but it's worth exploring, I think, with clients how they are best going to sort of absorb this information, whether they're actually they prefer an interactive resource. So, maybe looking at the careerometer from LMI for all, where they're clicking on buttons, it's always a hit. And I think that can be a hit, hit with anybody really, I think, because it's, the simplicity. And really, I think when we're, any labour market information actually really should try and make it as simple as we can, regardless of age group. Some people like to listen to others talking. So, maybe videos might be a good something like I could to look at. And then obviously you've got the data below that.
Helen, just on that front. No, absolutely. I mean, I think just one thing to drop in, which I'll make sure we put in the resources. And some people may be aware of this, but I think when you talk about illustrating LMI, those who've kind of been based in Yorkshire and Humber may be familiar with the Shape Your Future booklets that Careers Yorkshire and Humber used to put together. And in South Yorkshire, we've still had a little bit of that over the past year through HEP, through the Widening Participation Teams. And they are absolutely fantastic because it's exactly what they do. They show the local sectors, they illustrate it very simply, key employers, number of work in that sector, all those sort of things. So I would agree completely. Those have been used with, certainly when I used to work in schools in Leeds, they were used with students, but actually they were really popular with parents because they were so straightforward.
I think they're based on something that I produced. That started those back in 2005. I think they've been based on those. So they were really helpful. But again, that's regional. That's local, isn't it? Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. I think so. I mean, some great points here. I mean, just coming back, I know we're a little bit short on time, so we're going to kind of move across if we can and try and summarise all of this. But I mean, some brilliant points already. Just to kind of go back into the comments really briefly, I think there were two great comments which I think will lead quite nicely into your final thoughts, Helen. It's not Jerry Springer, but we're maybe making it sound like Jerry Springer. So I think a couple of comments here from Facebook user. I'm afraid I can't see your name, but a lot of opportunity for AI to get smarter at gathering information and data from multiple sources. I know there's some of that stuff happening already. And I think a really good comment here around the key with LMI not to get into the trap of thinking that it needs to be a crystal ball, which I think is something that's kind of clearly come back from you today, Helen. We've got a number of other really, really good comments. Some about MZ, which again is a great resource for LMI, which again we can put on the links. And we're also talking about, some comments in there around the hidden job market as well, in terms of the jobs being advertised, what happens in terms of relying on job board data when we talk about speculative applications and roles that maybe aren't advertised. So, I mean, it's really interesting to see kind of different perspectives people have within the group. Just before we finish, Helen, move on to the news section. In terms of kind of, I suppose, key takeaways or sort of final thoughts on the subject of LMI, if we had to press you maybe on some top tips that people could take away from today's session in terms of using LMI within their practice, what would you maybe kind of come back to?
There's so much to talk about, isn't there? And half an hour isn't really enough. Well, we've already talked about the organisation. So it's about, I recognise that, practitioners don't have a lot of time, but the way of gaining confidence with LMI is to take some time and to organise and start exploring some quick wins where you can. I would also like to say that it's depending on where you work, obviously, but if you work for a careers organisation, it's a two-way process, or should be seen as a two-way process. So where you come across local labour market information, hopefully there's a central point where you can feed that information back to your information department, where they can then disseminate that out to more people. I know sometimes it's, might be via Twitter, so advisors might have Twitter accounts, and then they can send those on to their clients. So try and see it as a sort of an organic thing, and share wherever possible. I'd also like to say about just thinking about reliability, checking your sources as well, because now, with people can set up their own websites. There's lots of people out there sort of setting up these amazing careers websites, sometimes without that broader perspective, maybe of career guidance or of broader sector knowledge. So sort of make sure that you do check your resources, help your clients to evaluate that information. I think we were talking, yesterday, it's sort of like approaching it like fake news. Just have a quick check, just take that time out to think, is this current? Is this relevant? And is it even, is it UK based, or is it, geographically correct, where your clients are based? Because I think a lot of our clients will get information from the media, friends and family, social media, and sometimes that could be maybe skewed. It might not be as current or impartial as we might hope it to be. So it's about information literacy, I suppose, and digital literacy as well, and being able to help clients to understand information and then how to use it, like with various websites, like Find an Apprenticeship, how to work out, those using filters basically on websites as well. So time is ticking on. Oh,
you're on mute, Sabiha. You're on mute, Sabiha.
Oh dear.
Yep, no worries. There we go. I think she's got it. No, you're still on mute. Yeah. Okay. We'll come back.
Sorry. Sorry. I'm back on. Sorry,
No
I muted myself. No, I was just saying that the comment section as you were talking just blew up there.
Yeah.
So many people have resonated with the comments and the feedback and the tips that you've provided. So definitely, I feel that there is a need for us to be sort of spending more time. Somebody's just suggested that we should have a semi-regular LMI briefing via the Facebook group. So clearly, so that people can take ownership of a region, sector, etc. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us today. I know she's dashing off. So I guess to wrap up today, I think you've left us with some really sort of thought-provoking ideas, concepts, and tools that we can walk away with. And as Chris and I said, we will share in the resources, the New Look resources section for everybody to share with them. So I think for now, Helen, yes, we've got a lot more to talk about on this subject. Yeah. And there are so many ways that we could go down. But I think on behalf of Chris and I, and obviously of all the members and everybody that's sort of contributed, I want to thank you for taking the time and coming and joining us today. We really appreciate
Thank you for having me.
The conversation is definitely sparked some great ideas. And that then takes me on to the CDI news. So what is the latest that's happening with the CDI right now? So I'm just going to do a quick rundown of the latest CDI news. So the Career Guidance Guarantee, I know you've heard me talk about it, and you're going to hear me talk about it some more over the next few shows as well. And we ask each and every one of you to continue to lobby your local MP. All you have to do is just simply write to the MP. The CDI has already produced a template you can copy. A bit of an update, there's been 2 meetings that have been held in July with the Deputy Director of Careers of the DFE, Richard Simper, with the second including the new head of the Careers Unit, Jane Hubbard. The discussion centred around the recent plan for jobs and youth offer as unveiled by the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the FE white paper, which is due in the autumn. This will include the next iteration of the career strategy, and the CDI are led to believe that careers guidance will be a strand of the FE strategy. There's also a new code of ethics case study that's been launched on the website, and it explores how to support advisors who are working with challenging clients, and it's been produced by the CDI Professional Standards Committee. This new case study shows how to support advisors who are working with challenging clients, and we'll add the link, as I say, in the resources. There's also a new course and qualification for career coaches. It's called the CDI Certificate for Career Coaches. Now, there's a new lineup of other courses, expert training, digital bites program that's covering a whole range of subjects. So for anyone who's looking to upskill or, improve their CPD points, come September, head on over to the website because there is a whole host of both free and paid programs that you can access. I also want to welcome Peter Robertson, who's been appointed the new project associate in Scotland. CDI delighted to announce the appointment of Pete, who comes from the Edinburgh Napier University as the CDI project associate in Scotland. CDI, speaking of new posts, CDI is currently hiring at the moment. There is a vacancy for an internal verifiers / quality assurers. Now, the CDI Academy, and this is for the CDI Academy, as it's growing, they are now looking for additional internal quality assessors. So if this sounds like something that you would be interested in doing, you can submit your application after you've taken a look at the job spec via a CV and covering letter. So that's all the CDI news for this week. Chris, over to you for general news.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Sabiha. We're going to do a nice whistle stop on the general news. I appreciate we've run over a bit. And as Sabiha mentioned, all of these links are going to be in the Newlet resource that we'll be sharing slightly later on this week in terms of everything that's been on the show. I think there is a particular LMI related resource actually that's part of our main news. It's Charlie Ball in Prospects Illuminate has just put together his 18th of August labour market update. Does tend to be more geared towards the graduates, but there's some really interesting stuff in there. He collates a lot of sources, as Helen mentioned, from other people who post on social media. So well worth having a look at. We'll put the link in the chat thread. And I mean, linked to the LMI, just to kind of come on to, I think, Rebecca Closey-Jones's point as well, actually, about time to hire. Bit of a shameless plug for the podcast that a colleague and I do called The Next Normal. Our recruitment episode that we had recently indicated just that, actually, that the time to hire, basically all of the power really being in the hands of the employers, and a lot of recruitment companies finding that actually, people were kind of really extending the recruitment process because they feel that they could just play the market and wait for good candidates to come up, and possibly, in perhaps a slightly less or morally grey area, leaving candidates hanging a bit longer. So I think it's a really good point from Rebecca, and one that's worth kind of keeping an eye out for. In terms of the main news, we've got some, understandably, quite a lot of stuff around the algorithm and A-level and GCSE results, but also particularly quite a lot of stuff on the forgotten BTEC students. There's been a couple of small news stories about this, but a lot of BTEC students who haven't received results from Pearson yet, not really getting the airtime. I feel that perhaps the A-level and GCSE students are. Been quite a lot of commentary on that on LinkedIn and Twitter as well, and really worth looking out for, because of course, with the revised grades to teacher assessments, those BTEC students are actually then competing against people with even higher grades than they had before for apprenticeship university places. So really worth keeping a lookout for what happens with the BTEC students. A couple of news articles to feature in there as well. A good article from Tristan Hooley about sort of careers guidance practitioners really kind of advocating and having to advocate a little bit more on behalf of young people because of what's happened with some of the results issues, particularly with the universities. And some other good commentary as well from Wonky and from Debbie McVitie about whether the A-level system and our system of examination maybe needs to change off the back of what we've seen this year. I know a number of people certainly feel that way. Some other good information in there as well, some a little bit depressing in terms of job losses from certain companies such as Debenhams, Pizza Express, Marks and Spencer, but useful to keep an eye on. And also some news from a survey from Adecco about the number of redundancies that may happen off the back of the coronavirus job retention scheme. Again, as Helen mentioned earlier, keeping an eye on the drivers for change, what might be happening in terms of national policies. So quite a lot in the main news. We'll put it all in the linked document, but appreciate we've run over a little bit. We really thank you for spending the time this week joining us. Thanks so much again to Helen for giving up her time to be here, and thank you to everyone who commented. So have a great afternoon, have a great rest of the week, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time for our Results Day special.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.